Hi. Today I am very excited to introduce Enrique Urueta. Enrique is an award-winning playwright who has written multiple works such as The Johnson Administration, The Danger of Bleeding Brown, Learn to Be Latina, and Forever Never Comes. Some of the awards that he's won are, a Jerome Fellowship, the New Works Fund for Forever Never Comes, and won the Great Gay Play Contest, which is an annual contest for Learn to Be Latina. He's also a translator for the Lark Play Development Center. So thank you for joining me. I guess I just want to start by asking kind of like, where were you born and what was your early childhood like, and in what way did that help direct you towards theater and to writing?
Oh, wow. Oh, I was not expecting that. Let's see. So I was born in Radford, Virginia, but my parents moved from there within a year or so to a small town called Clover, Virginia, where I was raised. And so it's a small town in a very rural county in South Central Virginia, right on the North Carolina border, Halifax County. So when I talk about home, I kind of talk about the county as a whole, because even now in 2020, the population of the entire county is around 35,000 people. And the actual town that I grew up in was really small. And if I recall correctly, it has the distinction of being the only, I don't know if it's the only or the first town to, in the United States to petition for town status and then seek to have that town status revoked because there wasn't enough people to support the town in terms of taxes to be its own municipality. So yeah, small farm town. Like growing up, it was like lots of tobacco farms. That's changed over the years because of how tobacco and the tobacco industry has changed in the United States. But yeah, the area that I grew up in was pretty much 50-50 black and white. There were a few Asian families, like there were like a couple of Indian families. I remember a Filipino family. I remember as I grew older, a few Chinese families came to the area, but mostly it was mostly a 50-50 white and black town. There wasn't a lot of Latinos of any kind in the area. There was my family. My parents were Colombian. They immigrated in the late 60s, 68, I think. And there was a Cuban family, a Mexican family, and a Puerto Rican family. And those are the only four families that I can like recall from my time like growing up there until I went off to college. So yeah, it was weird. I shouldn't say weird. It was, I mean, it's what I knew. Mm-hmm. And the only I didn't realize that I was lacking anything culturally until I had the opportunity to go to Colombia for the first time. I had my grandmother was ill, and my mother wanted me to go with her to Colombia because I was the only one of the children who didn't have a memory of my grandmother. I have 5 older sisters, and there's a 5-year gap between me and the youngest of the 5 older sisters. So they all had like some kind of memory of her, and I didn't. And so I was a super nerd, like super nerdy kid. Because like when you're when you don't fit in, like there's a safety in books, and there's a safety in school. So I had this was like in my 9th grade year, and I had gotten permission from the school district to basically homeschool myself for a grading period, so that I could go to Colombia. And I remember like it. I remember that it was that that it was a big deal, because the school had never let a student homeschool themselves. But like all my teachers were like, if there's any kid who could homeschool themselves, it's this kid. And so yeah, so I basically homeschooled myself and went to Colombia for 6 weeks. And while my grandmother thankfully got better, but it was like the first time that I'd ever really been exposed to Latin American culture, like outside of my own family. And I didn't speak fluent Spanish. I spoke some, and the Spanish that I did speak was in a very thick Southern accent. And so like my family in Colombia had no idea what to do with me. And so when I got back from that experience, it just sort of shifted things for me in terms of my own identity. It was like the first, like I had never really, like I knew that like my family was Colombian, and I knew that I was of Latin American descent, but like I didn't have like a strong sense of that as an identity, namely because like it's hard to have, I think it was hard to have that as an identity if you're the only one, like if you're like one of the only ones around, because like I said, there were like a few other families, like there were a Puerto Rican family, a Cuban family, and whatnot, but like like, and we're all immigrant families too, where like our parents immigrated here, and so all the kids were first generation. So like if you're first generation here, there's like especially now, there's this sense of Latino as an identity, or Latinx as an identity. But like for immigrant Latin Americans, like that's like, it's not a thing. It's like, it's very nationalistic. So like there's not like this sense of camaraderie or community just because you all speak Spanish. Like there is to an extent, like for like because of the language, but like my parents didn't get along with the Mexican parents, and the Puerto Rican parents didn't like my parents, and nobody liked the Cubans. So it was all it was, there wasn't a Latin American or Latino community like really to be had, and so it was something that I became extremely aware of after returning from that trip, and that had continued to make me think about my own identity, and think about like who I am in the world, and think about identity in terms of nationality, in terms of like in terms of ethnicity, in terms of language, like all these things just sort of sent me spiraling. And those are the things that continued to, that those like stayed with me all through college, and only became more more intense as I had an opportunity to do any kind of cultural studies work in college that you don't really get to do so much, at least in the community that I grew up in. So yeah, those questions like drove me in college and as a theater student, and also in a way as a scientist, because I noticed I became hyper aware of being the only one at these like geology conferences, and there was a sense of not belonging in that world, and also like a sense of not belonging in like the world of theater either. But at least in theater, I was fortunate enough to have had a professor my sophomore year who saw me, and like, I mean that like saw me as a person, and was like, here's some Shri Moraga, here's some Luis Alfaro, here's some Octavio Solis, here's some Caridad Stitch. Yeah, and like introduced me to these plays and playwrights, and that was like probably one of the greatest things that she could have done for me, because it completely shifted my life. Like I didn't go to college intending to study theater. I went to college on a geology scholarship, and I'd done theater in high school. Like I did a couple of plays, of really god awful plays, but like did a couple of plays. A terrible actor, but like I fell into theater as an undergrad. So I think like that experience of having a teacher in the theater department like introduced me to these plays, and some other plays by queer playwrights, got me I think the best way to put it is that I was so confused about who I was as a person, being like a Colombian American who doesn't really speak Spanish, like, and like having grown up without any Latin American culture around them, being like the chubby gay kid, the gay kid who isn't white, that like there are multiple points of identification that I could have, but no matter what, I didn't fit for one reason or another. So like I said, like being like the non-white chubby gay guy, being the Latino with a Southern accent, which I don't have now because I worked with a vocal coach. I took voice and speech as an undergrad to learn how to neutralize my accent, and it's like I'm a horrible actor, but like that vocal training really stuck. Yeah, I don't. That's a very like long roundabout answer to I think what you asked, but yeah.
That was a beautiful answer, full of a bunch of fascinating revelations. But just to naturally completely throw the script aside and build off of that, I mean, you mentioned finding your way into theater without necessarily feeling like you fully belonged, heavily due to the intersection of multiple aspects of identity that inherently defeated the subconscious societal expectation of fitting an assumed mold.
Yeah.
So what did allow you to gravitate towards theater and to writing, and what kept you with that during a period where you felt tentative about it?
Oh wow. Woo. We're going into some deep stuff. I was not expecting any of this. Wow. No, it's good. So I went to William and Mary, the College of William and Mary. It's a small liberal arts college in Virginia, in Williamsburg, Virginia, and there were. I mean, all universities have some sort of general ed requirements of like you've got to take you've got to like check these course boxes off to like have like a minimum standard of general education, and then you like have your degrees and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
I was a big science geek in high school. Like I said, I loved earth science, and I grew up wanting to be a paleontologist, and I had I was salutatorian of my high school class, and so like I like did well on my SATs, did like was like top of my class, and so I knew that I would be competitive for different scholarships, and so I'd found this one for the American Association of Minority Geoscientists, and so it basically paid my tuition for William and Mary, and then I also got an academic scholarship from William and Mary, and that covered the rest. So basically, I went to William and Mary because I would be able to go for free. I remember that I applied to 27 colleges and universities, and I got in everywhere but Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford, and I was waitlisted at Brown. And then I got in like 22 other places. And what it came down to was just finances, because like my family was poor. Like my mom, my parents divorced and I was living with my mom, and she was a factory worker. So like, all this is to say, like, to arrive at the point that there's an element of, and I can say this in retrospect, that there's an element of privilege to know that you want to study theater. because because like a lot of people who study theater at the undergrad level, like had like exposure to lots of going to lots of plays, Broadway musicals, traveling to New York, or like seeing touring productions, and taking acting classes, taking like going to drama like camps and things like that. I didn't have any of that. So like the most I had was like being involved with theater in high school, and so that when I got to college, this is why I brought up the general ed stuff. I had already AP'd out of like, my goal in high school was to like take AP classes in humanities so that I could get like humanities stuff out of the way and just focus on science. Because like it was instilled in me that like math and science is what sets you up for success. And so yeah, so like I AP'd out of history, I AP'd out of English, I AP'd out of a bunch of humanities stuff, so that I could just go in and like do the science stuff that I wanted to do. And then when I met with my freshman counselor, we were going through like this mandatory meeting of like what I was going to take, and I remember like I remember that for my first semester I had registered for intro to geology with lab, calculus with lab, intro to biology with lab, and intro to chemistry with lab. And my advisor, who was in the geology department, took a look at my schedule and said, absolutely not, I will not approve this. And I was like, I was dumbfounded. I was surprised that someone who was in the geology department, the department that I intended on being a major in, was going to look at that schedule and say no. And he said that he wasn't going to approve that this is a liberal arts university, and that there is an important value to studying art and literature and the humanities, if only so that it makes you a better communicator as a scientist. And so I remember that he said, you can keep geology and lab and one of these other lab classes, but you have to take 2 humanities classes as well. And so I ditched the bio. No, I negotiated and got him and I negotiated down to dropping one of the science lab classes and then taking 1 humanities class. And he agreed to that. So I dropped chemistry with lab, and he was like, okay, you've got to take an arts or humanities class. So what's it going to be? And so I looked at the general ed requirements and saw that like the things that were left were like math, science. The only things that I didn't have, the only things that I had left were a philosophy requirement, social science requirement and an arts requirement, and a writing seminar, like like a composition class in my freshman year. But they had there were these freshman seminar programs that were very writing intensive, and so like I was looking for a freshman seminar that got the freshman seminar requirement out of the way, that was writing intensive, so that counted for the composition, that also fulfilled the arts requirement. And the only one was the intro to theater. Like BK. So I signed up for this freshman seminar on intro to theater, and like I'm sure you had some, like, I don't know what your intro to theater classes were like. This intro to theater class that I had was unlike any other intro to theater class that I've heard about from other people before, because like he did it through the lens of a deep dive into a playwright. And so the semester that I took it was first semester freshman year. It was basically an intro to theater through the works of Tennessee Williams. And so we read nothing but Tennessee Williams plays. But we like learned about acting and like and Marlon Brando and like Streetcar Named Desire. And, we learned about costume design by the Broadway production of Summer and Smoke. We learned about lighting design through studying like the Glass Menagerie, and how innovative it was in terms of its lighting design at the time. So like we read nothing but Tennessee Williams plays, but we were learning like aspects like about all aspects of theater through this class. And I remember that it was this huge revelation for me. I'm trying to think of like which, like I can't remember which play in particular like sparked it, but I remember like by midway through the semester, I just I felt like this whole other world had opened up to me, because I'd never been taught to think about art. I mean, I think you could just leave it at that. I've never been taught to think about art. But art as having a social context, and art as having a and I mean, performance, like things like theater and film as being something more than entertainment.
Theater for
Which,
social change.
Pardon?
Theater for social change.
Like broadly speaking, I like there's a sort of genre for theater as theater for social change, and that's not what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But it's but like theater and like all art having a social and political context. So like to me, like there's no like all art is political art. uh, it's like the avoidance of direct politics in your work is in itself a political stance. So there's this way in which I became really obsessed with how theater can how theater can teach us about society, about our culture, about history. How theater just isn't just entertainment. That there's how theater theater artists create plays which become part of the culture, and like art shapes culture, and then the culture shapes the art that we make, and how it all becomes integral. Like we as artists are conditioned by the culture in which we live, and the art that we produce in turn shapes or has the potential to shape the world around us. And I'd never really thought about that before. And so that class, after like I went into college thinking that I was just going to be a scientist, and I left that. I knew after that first semester that I wanted to study theater as well. Like I had no desire to be but I had no desire to like to be an actor or director. I was like the weird kid in the theater department who wanted to be an academic and like wanted to like go into a PhD program. And so like I did take my second year of college. Sorry, I'm going long. Tell me to shut up if you want me to shut up.
You're all good. There's
Yeah.
countless details to learn along the way.
Yeah. My sophomore year, what turned me into a playwright specifically was first semester, my sophomore year. I remember going to the theater department lobby, and there's a bulletin board, and there was a flyer advertising 2 special topics courses that semester by visiting artists named Lois Weaver and Peggy Shaw. And I don't know if you have had the opportunity at all to study their work. They're a company called Split Britches. Their work is now increasingly featured in some like anthologies and theater history texts and whatnot. But they're a lesbian feminist performance, originally a trio, now duo, that have been making work since the 80s, largely affiliated with the Wow Cafe in New York, which no longer exists. It was a women's experimental performance space that I know supported like Lois and Peggy, supported Split Britches in their work, but also the works of like Carmelita Tropicana and Holly Hughes. I don't know if you've heard of any of these people, but in any case, one of the professors in the theater department had studied, had did their PhD at University of Hawaii, and while she was at Hawaii, Lois Weaver and Peggy Shaw were in residence at Hawaii working on a piece for the University of Hawaii, and they had stayed in touch, and so she had gotten them a visiting professorship for the fall semester, and they were teaching 2 classes, writing for performance and writing for solo performance and writing for ensemble performance. And I remember like being transfixed like by the flyer for it, like because it was a striking photo of them, and the professor who had brought them saw me looking at the flyer, and she was like, you should take that. And I was like, which one? She was like, oh, it doesn't matter. And I was like, looks really cool, but like, I don't know if I can fit it in my schedule and I gave what kind of reason. They were like, these are special topics classes, and then there was like requirements.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever bullshit reason I came up with, she just like cut me off and was like, you should take their classes. And I realized years later that the you was that you, young homosexual, you should be studying with the big dykes, because they will teach you things. Like that's what she was trying to communicate in a way that she couldn't communicate. And I, again, am like thankful to have had like a professor who saw me and then saw that like there were these classes that I would benefit from. And so I decided to just like take both of those classes because I couldn't decide. And so I took ensemble performance, a writing class, where like the class as a whole wrote a performance piece that we performed at the end of the semester. Mm-hmm. It was this like meditation on this ensemble created like meditation on Southern life called Be Nice or Leave. I still have the script for it. It's phenomenal. And I like say that with like not nostalgia for the project, but like as a playwright looking back on like on this and seeing what like we as undergrads created, and like seeing that like for its flaws it was actually really sophisticated in what it was doing. And I also took their solo performance class, and those classes were simultaneously mind-blowing and extremely frustrating, because I fully acknowledge that I was like not like the best student for those classes, because I became like I was resistant because I just spent a year learning about theater in this like lens of like Tennessee Williams and like Arthur Miller and like these like canonical like mainstream sort of naturalistic like mm-hmm. naturalistic and realistic theater works, and then to be working with artists who were like, yeah, we'll get to a script, but like let's be in our bodies, and this idea of arriving at a text through the body was something that was like not only completely foreign but absolutely terrifying to me, and I at the time later it was both because like it was this combination of like when you're like this culture isn't kind to people who are overweight, especially gay culture, so like to it's hard to talk about. Yeah, so there's a way in which like you get made to feel bad about who you are because of your body. And then when you add these layers of race and ethnicity into the mix of this world of theater that felt and is in a lot of ways so overwhelmingly white. And I don't say that to attack white people. Of theater can be so white that like if you're not white, it makes you hyper aware of your own body and like instilling feelings of you don't belong here. And so like there are these multiple ways of feeling that like I didn't belong because of my body, because of being overweight, because of not being white. Like I was gay bashed like every year of my undergrad, like within 2 months of having started school, like that someone had stuck a knife through my door with a note that says "die fag." That's a die fag. And like they caught the guy who did that, and the guy got away with like a semester of probation. And like when I went to the dean to like inquire why, like the response from the dean was well, this is what happens when you're so gay. And like we're at a different place now. It's like 2020, but this is like 1996. So I don't say that to like arouse any kind of like pity or sympathy. I talk about that in a sense of like to reinforce that like the different ways that being made to feel uncomfortable about my own being, like as a body in this world, affected my ability to fully engage and be receptive to like what they were trying to teach, of like in terms of like generating work physically and like and gesturally and the voice, and coming at playmaking through instinct, through collage making, and through the body, as opposed to this purely intellectual exercise. And I remember at the end of the semester, Lois Weaver, after the last class, asked me to come to her office, and I went to her office, and she shut the door, and she just started like, well, it felt like yelling. She probably wasn't yelling. She was probably like expressing her like extreme disappointment in me and her frustration in me. And I remember saying, like responding to her with this doesn't matter anyway. This doesn't really matter anyway. I'm not a theater artist. I'm a scientist. And this was the one that she yelled. She slammed her hands on her desk and she said, "You're a writer and you won't let yourself be." And then the conversation just like ended with that. And like I left from our office, and I remember I got B's in the class, which was like neither here nor there. But like the next semester, when I took feminist theater, like one of the textbooks for the class was an anthology of their works, like just like Sue Ellen Case had done this. Have you read any Sue Ellen Case? She's a performance theorist. She used to be at UCLA and some other places. She wrote. God, she was prolific. She's retired, not dead. She wrote a book that's that at least in the 90s and early 2000s was used widely, called Feminism in Theater. Anyway, one of her other books was this edited anthology of performance works by Split Britches, and like I had read like the work in like in that class, so like a semester after having studied with them. And I wish that like, and I think this speaks to like Lois and Peggy as people, like they didn't make us read their work. Like they weren't interested in us like reading their performance pieces. Like they were interested in us reading the things that inspired them. Oftentimes like that weren't even theater, it was like poetry and literature. Like we read like lots of Carson McCullers. And so there's a way in which like I didn't grasp everything that they were trying to teach until I got to like see their performance texts and see videos of their performance work. And then it was like after seeing their work, then I really got it, or at least started to get it. And then basically, you know, my entire life going forward, it's been about like further and further understanding the different things that they were trying to teach me. And so even though that my work isn't, like I don't think you can look at my plays, I don't think that anyone who like can look at my plays and think of Lois and see like a lineage to Lois Weaver and Peggy Shaw. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think it's a cool thing. That like I've a lot of how I work and a lot of how I create work as a theater artist and how I work with actors and designers even like in the room comes from like the way that I worked with the things that I learned from Lois and Peggy. Like I still have like my notes from that class 23 years ago, and like I like every year I still go back to those notes and think, oh yeah, and like when I when I get stuck in my writing process, I'll like return to like one of their vocal exercises or one of their gestural exercises, one of their movement exercises to help me get unstuck and to help me figure out a scene or something. And so there's a way in which like, even though I'm very, I'm very text-based because I just write plays, like I'm not a writer performer. There's an element of like, of how, there's an element in which like I'm consciously aware of embodiment, both in terms of representation on the representation and also embodiment as process and embodiment as generative embodiment as creation. And that's something that I picked up. And I'm so thankful to have had that opportunity to learn from them, because that profoundly has like shaped my work to the point where like I think my being a playwright is completely a function of me having gone specifically to William and Mary specifically at the time that Lois Weaver and Peggy Shaw were in residence, because it was from that moment on that I became interested in writing.
Wow.
That was a really long answer. Sorry.
I mean, long, yes, but you simply were painting each stroke of the story, and it came full circle. But that's really heartwarming to see such active involvement and people going out of their way to help you find yourself in your own voice.
Yeah, absolutely. Lois Weaver and Peggy Shaw have a new I think close this weekend, but they're doing they're in residence at they have a show at La Mama, and tickets are $5. I think it closes Sunday. So if you're interested, I'll send you a link so that you can get a sense of like who these people are. Because for $5 tickets, it's definitely worth the investment. It'll be unlike anything. Their work is unlike anything that you probably will have seen. I highly recommend getting a chance to like see something of theirs.
I mean, after hearing that, I can't really say no. that feels like, hey, I can push back the 10 to 15 page social psych research proposal. Don't worry, it's due Friday. Nothing to fret over. I can make the time. But yeah, no, I absolutely love to sneak in a glimpse at some of that work from artists whose voice and personal influence had such an impact on yours, of course.
Yeah.
And to combine those two narratives together for our next question, I suppose, like you talked a lot about how, I mean, like we've really been saying, the intersection of identity is almost as critical in our own voice and defining ourselves as those individual aspects in and of themselves.
I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but I know for me, definitely. And it's because of the way those intersections complicated my life. That became sort of the commonality, the common thread throughout my work. Like, you read my play Learn to Be Latina, but like that's completely different from like my other plays. And
We'll talk about them. What is this through line? Go for it.
Like the common thread. Well, okay, so like you read Learn to Be Latina. It's about a young Lebanese American woman who meets with record executives that tell her that she's beautiful and talented, but that there's no way in post 9/11 America that a Middle Easterner can be a pop star. So they bring in an ethnic consultant who's Irish to teach her how to be Latina with a Cuban sock puppet, and shenanigans ensue.
Quite the summary.
Yeah. And then like, I don't even really talk about the Johnson administration because it was like a 10-minute play that was basically my, I include it because it was like my first production. And I think those are, those first kinds of things are, particularly for a playwright, are like important milestones. So I included, even though it was only like performed like at this one theater at this one time back in 2003, 4, I think. And that it was a 10-minute play about two roommates, like a guy and a girl, and they're like the young woman wants to go to protest to an Iraq War protest, and the guy literally just wants to stay at home and jerk off, and it kind of twee short play about political engagement and social protest, told through like a raunchy comedy. And The Danger of Bleeding Brown is my first full-length play, but it's never been produced, and I don't know that it ever will, and I'm okay with that. It's about a oh wow, I don't even describe what it's about. It's about a young Latino gay man in his early 20s living his life in San Francisco, who is a college student and becomes involved with with one of his professors, and turns their relationship into increasingly extreme forms of BDSM play that really is a manifestation of his own internalized racism. And it's a play that has never been produced, mainly because it's very sexually graphic. But like, what's funny to me about that is like I remember having conversations with artistic directors who were like completely shocked and flummoxed by the play. And is your class gonna be watching this, or is it just like Daphne?
I mean, the answer is it'll be public on YouTube.
Oh, it'll be public on YouTube.
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, whatever. So like, I'm not embarrassed by it, but like, there's a scene, probably like there's one scene in the play that that sticks in people's mind, and it's a fisting scene, and it's this very sexual, like toward the end of Act 1 of the play, there is this very frenetic assemblage of images and moments happening on stage. Theoretically, it's never been as written since it's never been performed, but like there's like this sex scene going on here, this like this fisting scene, this like really intense monologue that gets intercut by the sex scene and the scene of a pretty violent murder, and like that's how the first act ends. And I remember like being in meetings with like artistic directors both in like San Francisco and like and around the country. Like every artistic director I had the play ended up. I submitted the play to the Bay Area Playwrights Festival, which is this new play development conference produced by the Playwrights Foundation in San Francisco.
Weren't you?
And I was one of. Pardon?
Weren't you runner up there? With the Danger of Bleeding Brown?
Oh. Runner up. Oh no, that was a runner up for the Yale Drama Series Prize, which is this like $10,000 award that Yale University Press gives out. So it was a runner-up. It lost to I don't want to say lost because I don't consider it like, even though it's
not a competition.
It's not a competition. But like the person who won that year. Oh my God, why am I blanking on her name? Oh my God, she wrote 410 Gone. I'm blanking on her name. She's gonna kill me if she ever sees this. I'm gonna have to Google, sorry.
Go for it, no worries.
This is just like the age of the coronavirus where I don't have any kind of memory. Like I will forget what I go upstairs for.
No worries. Oh, while you're researching,
Frances Kohag. Frances Kohag. Frances Yahoo Kohag. She teaches at oh God, some school in I want to say UC Santa Barbara now. Not sure. Asian American playwright, really phenomenal writer. So I remember losing, or being the runner-up, I should say, and then reading her play, and then thinking, "Yep, this play deserves it." Beautiful play. It's a play called 410 Gone. Absolutely stunning work. So Frances Cowhig, Cowhig. So if you ever get a chance to read that play, it's glorious. But no, so I submitted this play to the Playwrights Foundation for their play development series, and it was selected. It was like my first major anything, and it was kind of scandalous, I guess. And so it got me a lot of attention. It was the play that got me into grad school and got shortlisted for a lot of different awards, but it's never been produced because of its challenging content, shall we say. And then Forever Never Comes is a play about a young trans man in rural Virginia and falling in love with a young Latina, and this supernatural force that sort of intercedes when they try to forge this relationship. It's a very reductive way of talking about it. That was another long, convoluted way to answer that question. But like the commonality of everything though is like these intersections of identity and how these multiple points of identity within a person can create conflict. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that I'm that is the common thread between like all those places, like arriving at the conflict through the intersections of these identity and how these collisions from within oneself sort of reverberate out and affect your relationships with other people. Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's absolutely fascinating and extremely relatable. Wow, I mean, that's just a lot to process, but that's also just really, sorry, the psych person in me is just flaring up.
Ooh, how so?
Oh, I just love learning about people and what kind of makes them tick, both from like a biological, a psychological, a historical, and like a sociocultural lens, and how, like you were exactly saying, it's the compounding factor of everything that creates us, and that it is those collisions that drive us.
Absolutely.
Like,
and that compel us, even though we may not even be aware of it.
yeah, no, I mean, I definitely can sympathize a lot with that ideology and experience of feeling like the other in a lot of settings. Like, I was one of 3 gay people who graduated from my class in high school, and like one of them, like I didn't really know at all, and the other was like my best friend for like over a decade, who'd been in the closet until like 2 months before we graduated, and there I was out for like 3.5 years. But I mean, again, it's those intersections of what makes us different that inherently allows revelation. I even joined the Gender Sexuality Alliance before I even knew I was queer. But
Yep.
Yeah, well, definitely talk a lot about the intersection. Actually, wait, that is a worthwhile side note. Speaking of like transitions and the intersections, I mean, one of the things you have in Learn to Be Latina, and as I've seen is common in a lot of Latinx plays, is the intersection of bilingual language. So just combining English and Spanish in the same play for one audience. And I guess, what are some factors that go into that decision making and deciding what should be clear, what can be hidden, into whom, and how does it affect the experience of understanding everything being said, or simply on context and actor expression and interpretation? And like we said, how do these various factors affect the usage of language? And feel free to also talk about your work as a translator, which is another huge component of working with language just in a very literal sense.
So how to start? Well, so I think, especially with Learn to Be Latina, I was very conscious. So the play is mostly in English, and like there elements of Spanish throughout, but I was very conscious of writing it in such a way so that it was either translated soon after or clearly understood within the context of what was being performed, like where the meaning would be clear. And there are also moments that are sort of intro moments, where they're like, I know that there are moments of the play that that Spanish speakers will really get and really enjoy, and people around them will be like, what? And I like that. It was it's kind of my subtle or not so subtle way of making people feel what it feels like to be excluded. So to create like moments that are just for certain people that may not be for other people in the audience, and that's and that's okay.
Yeah.
Because for that segment of the audience, it will be a treat. But I do that and Learn to Be Latina with multiple populations, so that like they're like these like moments for they're these moments that I wrote specifically for queer people in mind, who would really get these moments that other people might not get, and that's okay. I guess like if anything, it was like constantly like finding ways to make majority culture feel like a minority at my play. And I know that I was effective in doing that because I like went to premiered in Berkeley, California at Impact Theater, and I went to every performance of the play because I was fascinated by audience reactions. And there were people who would walk out or would like be angry at intermission, which I think is hysterical because I think the play is like really, really funny. But
Oh no,
like,
it was absolutely hilarious. My roommate can attest to the fact that I like laughed in our room while reading the play.
But yeah, there are people who were really, really angry by the play. Like they were, I remember like, some white feminist women being really angry by it. Straight white guys being really angry by it. And I would have conversations with them and ask them like what offended them about the play, and they would like give their reason, and then that I would like point to like these moments of the play that were also offensive, and they were like, oh, that was funny, and I would just like turn it back at them and ask them like, oh, why is it funny when it's done to these people but not done to you? And like that, like for some of them that just anger and like or like became points of like expansion for them. But yeah, so it became a tool of like both. It was like language was a tool of both creating community like from within an audience experience, for like a shared experience of people who get those moments, and intentionally creating moments of isolation so that people would know what that felt like.
Yeah. And of course, those moments of isolation, just like you were demonstrating, creates an internal dialogue, a struggle, and asking questions and having revelations and having, a change of mind.
Yeah,
Yeah,
hopefully.
I mean, yeah, it asks the viewer, the reader, or the audience member just to engage with the work on more than a surface level. I think that's really cool and engaging.
Yeah.
And one thing, of course, you mentioned with, I mean, the nature of Danger of Bleeding Brown, and of course with Learn to Be Latina, there's a lot of experimentation with, I mean, one with stereotypes, but also with what might be considered like socially taboo subjects, or I mean, the Johnson administration blatantly acknowledged that a character was extremely focused on masturbation, which are topics that might make some people uncomfortable, but I'm also going to say, like, what makes those topics uniquely interesting to engage with, and in what ways do you think they might relate to queer Latinx theater?
I think that particularly in the time that I was like really forming like deep diving into like theater, particularly as an undergrad, and like in the early 2000s, I was really drawn to so there's this period in basically the 90s of like British theater. It was a movement called in your face theater, and I became really struck by like those playwrights in Britain at the time, playwrights like Sarah Kane, Mark Ravenhill, Joe Pennell, but Mark Ravenhill and like most directly like Mark Ravenhill and Sarah Kane, who whose plays. So Mark Ravenhill wrote a play called Shopping and Fucking, and it, like, I mean, it's like a critique of of capitalism, but done in this way through like these interpersonal and sexual relationships that like that I think is done so phenomenally well. And Sarah Kane is often taught a lot in universities now. Have you had a chance to have you read any of her work as an undergrad? Like,
I don't think I have, to be honest.
That's fine. But they're both playwrights who were very scandalous in the late 90s and early 2000s that like 20 years later are taught more and more at the university level. And so so like that was going on in Britain, and then there are a couple of playwrights in Canada whose work that I really love. Brad Fraser, who's this gay playwright who wrote this play, Unidentified Human Remains and the True Nature of Love. And I should say, it's that play specifically that probably sealed the deal for me toward like being a playwright. Because I remember it was the summer of '99, and I was doing at a National Science Foundation Research Fellowship at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks, at their Geophysics Institute. I was doing I was doing this independent project on. I was trying to constrain the date of the opening of the Bering Strait by analyzing ash layers in the sediment from the Bering Strait to see if I could further constrain the age down, if I could reduce the window down than it had been before, and I couldn't. But it was a fun project. But like, anyway, I was doing this research project there, summer '99, and I also had funding to go to the Association for Theater and Higher Education conference, which that year was in Toronto. And so I flew from Alaska to Toronto for this conference, and a Canadian theater scholar was tickled that I was there and that I wanted to learn about Canadian theater. Like, because like I'd gone there and like I realized that like, oh yeah, Canada has its own culture. Of course they would have their own theater, and we know nothing about it. And so like I went to this Canadian theater historian and like said that, and I remember he skipped his panel, but he skipped things that he wanted to attend so that he could take me to this theater bookshop. And I told him that I had like I'd gotten a grant from to go to this conference and I had lots of money left over. So I took a look at my budget. I was like, I have about $1,000 I could spend, and I want as much as I want you to take me shopping and tell me what I should buy. And so we went to this theater bookstore in Toronto, and he just was like excitedly like picking out like plays and playwrights and like filled this like shopping cart. I spent like $1,000 on plays and anthologies and Canadian theater history or whatever. And I remember us going to like this shelf of plays just by Brad Fraser, and he was like, "Oh, you would love this," and like the whole "you" thing again, like being like, "You young homosexual, you will appreciate this." And so he just like cleared the entire shelf. It's like one of everything of Brad Fraser. He was like, and I was so overwhelmed. I was like, "Oh, which do I start with? Which do I start with?" And he picked up this one play and held it up, and he's like, "This is what you should start with." And it was Unidentified Human Remains and the True Nature of Love. And it's a play set in, I want to say, I think it's set in Edmonton, in I think Edmonton's in Alberta, in Canada. Anyway, it's set in Edmonton, and it's about this like group of young misfits. Like one of them's like a server, like this gay man who's like a waiter, and like his roommate, and they're like both like young party kids basically. Like they're not kids, so they're like in their like mid to late 20s. But they're like young 20-somethings, like living this party life. Lots of drugs, lots of sex, and then and all the while there's this like serial killer killing women and disposing of their bodies like under this bridge, and so it turns out that like one of their friend group turns out to be the serial killer, and like the play, like through all its like sex and violence, like ultimately like becomes this exploration of like the limits of friendship, and like how do we like when do we stop being friends with the people who are our friends, like what is that line, and yeah, so I was really struck by how the sex and the violence in the play like opened up these deeply philosophical questions for me. And so like I know you asked in relationship to Latinx work, and like the work of Latinx playwrights led me to a realization that I could do this too. And at the same time, aesthetically, the works of these playwrights, like in Britain and in Canada, were so vibrant and exciting to me, and unlike anything that was being written that I had encountered in the United States in American theater, largely, and that's largely explained by like how like the nature of funding in the nature of arts funding in the United States being what it is means that larger institutions and the larger institutions tend to create what's important and what's deemed important in theatrical culture. And because of the nature of funding, these institutions in the United States are afraid to take risks, largely in the work that they produce, for fears of a loss of funding and loss of like financial support for the institution. So the work in the United States, in certain respects, at a certain level of theater, mainstream institutional large theaters, particularly from like the 90s through the early 2010s. Someone to even say like today tends to be more conservative than the work that gets produced at some of like the smaller theaters. Like my work has largely been produced by like smaller theaters in the country, or Latino specific companies, not companies like the Oregon Shakespeare Festival or the Public Theater or Lincoln Center Theater or the Goodman or Steppenwolf. So all that's to say, like I found a level of aesthetic kinship with these playwrights who aren't Latinx, as well as like as specifically Latinx playwrights like Octavio Solis, like specific like the Latinx playwrights specifically that like really influenced like and shaped how I think about theater are Maria Fornes, Octavio Solis, and Jose Rivera in the United States. Those are like the big three for me. And there's a Colombian playwright named Enrique Buenaventura, whose work I discovered like after college. But yeah, so it's not like this singularly Latinx influence, and it's not this singular English and Canadian influence, but it's just like it's again like these points of intersection of like taking aesthetic inspiration from Fornes and Octavio Solis and Jose Rivera, and colliding it with like the sexual frankness And like what I really admired about like Sarah Kane and Mark Ravenhill, Brad Fraser, and Judith Thompson, who's the other Canadian playwright that I like really love, was that they weren't afraid of sex, they weren't afraid of violence, but their work isn't gratuitously violent or gratuitously sexual. At least I don't think it is. It
has a purpose.
It all has a purpose. And I know there are people who, if anyone watches this at some point, are going to argue with like that point with Sarah Kane because of specific moments and Blasted and Cleansed and Crave and whatnot. But like to me, like their work was absolutely refreshing. As a kid growing up when I did, and discovering their works, like when I did. Keep in mind, like gay marriage didn't become legal in this country until 2016. God, what like was it 2000? I should know this. The year that that the Supreme Court ruled that sodomy laws were unconstitutional. I want to say it was 2007. Let me Google that real quick. Sodomy law, Supreme Court. Was it 2007? Lawrence versus Texas. Oh no, 2003. So it was a few years off. So yeah, Lawrence versus Texas in 2003. Overturned like all sodomy laws in the United States. So it became illegal to criminalize gay sex if straight sex wasn't criminalized. So having grown up like both in the rural South in a very like conservative Christian community, gone to college at a fairly conservative university where like my existence as a gay man was like actively challenged on a daily basis, like as an undergrad. Made me think about sex and sexuality in a very charged way. And these playwrights like Ravenhill and Sarah Kane, Judith Thompson, and Brad Fraser were writing on those themes in a way that in a way that I didn't see as prevalent playwrights here in the United States. Mm-hmm. Again, you have the misfortune of talking to a very long-winded person. My apologies.
You're all good. I mean, frankly, it is a lot more engaging than quick, like 30-second responses. Like I had 26 questions prepped, and I'm very glad I don't have to go through every single one because I really like building them based on what you have to say.
Oh, excellent. And because like you're asking questions that I wasn't really prepared for, like, so I think had I been prepared with questions, I would have had like much more succinct answers. So I'm like answering these all on the fly. And I think it exposes kind of how my brain works, where like I see, like you ask me a question and then I'll start talking about like, you ask me a question about Latinx lyrics and I start talking about England and Canada. But like, I see and make connections.
I think the exact same way. I do the same thing to people I live with, so I understand.
Yeah, and so there's an extension that this way that I'm answering your questions, I think might give people insight into the way I think about my own work. It's because of, again, like these multiple points of intersections and like disparate connections that collide.
Yeah. Although you did bring up a good point. I don't want to take up too much of your time, so I guess I'll give at least one closing segue, which is like you've had a like sense of the pulse of both like the theater industry and queer representation, as well as Latinx representation, as well as the intersection of all these various components.
You froze completely, so I
realized I froze. I just stopped talking until it stopped.
Okay.
But I guess what, in a shorter way before the internet dies again, where do you think Latinx and queer theater, more specifically queer Latinx theater, may evolve within the next 20 years? Where do you think the industry might be headed? Or what shifts do you think we should or hope to see in these aspects of theater and how they relate to theater overall?
Wow. You know, I think I think right now it complicates things because frankly, like there are theaters around the country that are starting to close. So I talked a bit about arts funding before and how things are, how the nature of arts funding makes institutions choose what they produce
more selectively.
And we're starting to see how precarious the structure for institutional theater is in the United States right now. And if there is no influx of like if there's no stimulus money that goes to arts organizations, I think we're going to see I think we're in danger of seeing different organizations shutter across the country. So I don't want to be too fatalistic, but I also don't know. There's a way in which like this pandemic has sort of limited my ability to project into the future, because this has limited like this, at least for me, the coronavirus pandemic has instilled in me a sense of the conscious present in a way that I hadn't before. Like I'd always been one to exist in the present in pursuit of something in the future. And if there's any positive to have come out of this this situation, is that it has made me acutely aware of the daily present for myself. So I don't mean this to be a cop-out, but like I don't know how to answer that because I'm not in a state
Completely
of
valid.
I'm not in a state of thinking in a sense of futurity. But I will say that I am hopeful aesthetically, particularly because of you know, I feel like each generation paves the way for the people who come behind them. And so I feel like there are playwrights like Edwin Sanchez, yes, whose plays are very, like whose plays are like very good and like respected and taught, but whose works weren't like widely produced. Particularly like because of their queer content. Like I think Shari Moraga is a prime example of a playwright who is venerated on like the academic level, but like lots of people in American theater would be like, who is that? And that makes me sad because her work is wonderful. And the same goes for Edwin Sanchez. And so like I know that like their work in the 90s like made space for me to do my work, and I hope that my work creates space for future queer Latinx playwrights to do their work. And I know that these playwrights, like I didn't open the door for these playwrights, but like I'm really excited that like by the work of like Virginia Grace. Oh my God, I totally butchered her last name. She wrote this fascinating and like wonderful play called Blue that won the Yale Drama Series Prize. Had a want to say 2011 or 12. And then works by like Cristina Quintana, whose work is whose like work is strongly rooted in Latinx culture, and is also like unapologetically queer. And her work is getting like institutional support in like theaters in New York and getting produced around the country, and like that makes me excited. So I get excited to see queer Latinx playwrights starting to get commissions and awards and prizes from like major theaters and organizations around the country, and seeing that they're getting their works commissioned and getting these cash awards makes me feel like it's just gonna open up space for more of us queer mo's to get our work done in the future. whatever future that might be.
Now,
This has been a 2-hour interview in which you only got to ask 3 questions. I'm sorry.
oh no, it's been like at least like 6. Don't beat yourself up too much. But I mean, with that in mind, I'll close the recording here since it has been a while. But nonetheless, like, thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom, for your sincerity, and
I hope it's useful.
absolutely. Thank you.